Today we're going to dive into a case that's both fascinating and kind of disturbing. The story of Yukemaker.com.
Yeah, it's definitely one of those corners of the internet that makes you wonder about the darkest parts of, well, human nature, I guess.
It's easy to think of the internet as this, I don't know, this vast and limitless space.
Yeah.
But Yukemaker's a good example of how that's not always, how should I put it, not always the full picture.
Yeah, and what makes it even more unsettling is that it wasn't hidden or anything. It wasn't on some encrypted dark web server. It was just
There
there.
in the open.
Yeah.
So for anyone who hasn't heard of Yukemaker, and I'm guessing that's a lot of people, it was this website run by a man named Magnus Gustafsson.
And Magnus's story, well, it's a wild one.
It really is. So he's born in Norway in 1978. Now, Norway's not really known for its high crime rates, is it?
Not typically, no. We tend to think of Norway as a peaceful country, low crime rates.
Mm-hmm.
And from what we can gather, Gustafsson's early life seemed pretty normal.
Right.
But things take a bit of a turn, I guess you could say.
Let's talk about those turns. So late teens, early 20s, he's in trouble with the law back in Norway.
Yeah, a couple of fraud convictions.
You might brush it off, right? Like just a youthful indiscretion.
Right, except that this pattern of deception, kind of using other people for personal gain, it becomes this almost like a recurring theme in his life.
Yeah, and that's something to keep in mind as we get deeper into the whole Yukemaker thing.
Exactly. It's like he saw people's vulnerabilities, particularly those with BIDE, not as a condition, but more like, a business opportunity.
Wow, that's cold.
Yeah.
So this is all before he moves to the UK in 2012, goes through a divorce, and while we don't have all the specifics about that period in his life, you have to wonder if all that, the move, the divorce, if that kind of unearthed something in him, something that was maybe already there.
It's certainly possible. I mean, major life events like that can act as catalysts, right?
Absolutely.
And it's around this time that we see Gustafsson's interest in body modification, extreme body modification, starts to really take center stage. Specifically, his fascination with amputation.
And we need to be careful here because this isn't about body dysmorphia.
No, not at all. Gustafsson wasn't trying to, fix something he thought was wrong with his body. He was interested in amputation itself.
Okay, so that's where body integrity identity disorder comes in. BID. I have to admit, even researching for this deep dive, BID was new to me.
It's a very complex condition. Individuals experience this intense desire to have a healthy limb or body part removed.
So they feel like a part of their body doesn't belong, even though physically there's nothing wrong with it.
Right, and it's important to understand that for individuals with BID, it's not about self-harm or being suicidal.
Right.
It's about this desire to achieve a sense of wholeness, aligning their physical body with their internal sense of self.
That makes sense. So how does someone like Gustafsson, with his history of deceit and fraud, go from being interested in BID to actually creating Yukemaker?
Well, he immersed himself in online communities dedicated to these interests, and that's where he got the idea for Yukemaker.com.
And this wasn't just a forum for, like-minded individuals to connect or anything. This was something far more sinister.
Yeah, unfortunately, you're right. This is where the really disturbing part of this whole thing comes into focus. We're talking about a website that hosted videos, photos, even live streams of extreme body modification procedures.
And I mean, we're talking about genital amputation, castration, stuff that would make most people queasy just hearing about it. And it gets worse because these procedures were often performed in the most unsettling settings you can imagine, like hotel rooms, with little to no regard for sanitation, medical ethics.
Yeah, the lack of even basic medical safety is truly appalling. It's hard to wrap your head around, really.
It really is.
Yeah.
And as if that's not bad enough, just the scale of Yukemaker's reach is mind-boggling.
Right, and that's one of the things that I think makes this story so disturbing. We're not talking about some small hidden corner of the internet here.
Right, like Gustafsson was making a ton of money off this.
Over £300,000 between 2017 and 2021.
Wow.
With almost 25,000 members paying to see this stuff.
It's just, I don't know, 25,000 members. It's just staggering, and it makes you wonder, how did this go on for so long? I mean, were there no red flags? No one saying, hey, something's not right here?
Well, the people involved, both Gustafsson and and those he targeted, they weren't exactly broadcasting what they were doing, and he was operating under this veneer of normalcy, using hotels, blending in, at least on the surface, but that couldn't last forever, obviously. What ultimately brought Yukemaker down was the victims.
Some of them came forward.
They did, yeah. Shared their stories with law enforcement, gave firsthand accounts of the manipulation, the abuse.
Wow.
It couldn't have been easy, but their courage was absolutely crucial in exposing what was really going on.
Yeah, it's always amazing to see that kind of strength, that willingness to speak out, even when it must be so incredibly difficult. And it's not just about helping themselves, right?
Yep.
They probably prevented countless others from falling prey to this guy.
Absolutely. And once law enforcement got involved, the evidence against Gustafsson and his accomplices just started piling up.
Right.
Videos, photographs, online chat logs, financial records.
It's crazy how much digital evidence we leave behind.
It is, isn't it? And it all painted a very, very damning picture of what was happening.
And it wasn't just Gustafsson, right? We mentioned earlier there was a medical professional involved.
Yeah, a nurse named Nathan Arnold. He was Gustafsson's, for lack of a better term, right-hand man.
It's chilling to think that someone with medical training, someone who took an oath to do no harm, would be involved in something like this.
You would hope that someone in a position of authority like that would be, I don't know, above that sort of thing. But, well, this case shows that's not always true, does it?
It really makes you wonder what goes on in someone's mind to be able to, to compartmentalize like that.
It's a good question. And unfortunately, we may never have a satisfying answer to that. But for what it's worth, the courts didn't let Arnold off easy. He received a substantial prison sentence for his role in all of this.
Good. He deserved it. So let's talk about the trial. With all that evidence and with victims willing to testify, it must have been quite a spectacle.
It was. The details of the crimes, the unusual nature of Bide itself, it really captured the public's attention. The prosecution did a very thorough job presenting their case, and the jury ultimately found Gustafsson guilty.
Guilty on all counts.
Multiple counts, including grievous bodily harm, child sexual exploitation.
Wow.
Those are incredibly serious charges.
They are.
And the judge made it clear that he believed Gustafsson's actions were depraved, inhumane, and that he needed to send a message that this kind of exploitation would not be tolerated.
Rightfully so. What kind of sentence are we talking about here?
Life. With a minimum of 22 years before he's even eligible for parole.
22 years. It makes you wonder, does someone like that, do they feel any remorse for what they did? Do they even understand the gravity of their actions?
It's a question that often comes up in cases like this, isn't it? Trying to understand the mind of someone who could do something like this. It's difficult to say for sure.
Right. But even with Gustafsson behind bars, this case brings up some really important questions. Questions about consent, vulnerability, and the ethics surrounding a condition like Bide.
Absolutely. Because on the one hand, we want to protect the right to bodily autonomy, right? People should be free to make choices about their own bodies.
As long as they're not hurting anyone.
Exactly. But then we have cases like this where those lines get blurred. You have someone who's intentionally preying on people who are, for lack of a better term, vulnerable. Vulnerable because of a condition like Bide did. And it makes you wonder, where do you draw the line?
It's a tough one.
It really is. And there are no easy answers, unfortunately. But it's a conversation we need to have. Because this case, as disturbing as it is, it highlights just how important it is to be aware of these darker corners of the internet.
Even if they make us uncomfortable.
Exactly. And I think it's important to emphasize that this isn't about being afraid of the internet. It's about being informed. Just like we teach kids about digital literacy and online safety, we also need to have these open and honest conversations about the potential for harm.
Because this stuff can happen anywhere.
Yeah.
Yukemaker wasn't hidden on some secret server. It was a Google search away.
Which brings up another crucial point, the role of tech companies in all of this. Because how do you create online spaces that allow for connection and community while also implementing safeguards? Safeguards against people who would exploit these platforms.
It's a balancing act for sure. You want to protect free speech, but you also have a responsibility to protect vulnerable people. And with technology constantly evolving, it's not going to get any easier.
You're absolutely right. It's only going to become more complex. And it's something that we all have a stake in. Because the story of Yukemaker, while extreme, reminds us that even in our digital world, we're still dealing with very human vulnerabilities. And, well, very human darkness.
Yeah, no doubt about it.
And that, I think, is something that's worth thinking about.
A powerful thought. And I think this is a good place to maybe wrap up our deep dive into the world of Yukemaker.com for today.
Yeah, I think so. It's a case that certainly raises more questions than it answers, but that's okay.
Sometimes asking the right questions is the first step.
I couldn't agree more.
To our listeners, thank you for joining us on this deep dive. And remember, awareness is the first step towards creating a safer and more informed online experience. It's a conversation we can't just shy away from, even if it is uncomfortable. And I think the question of responsibility, especially when it comes to these tech companies, that's something we need to unpack a little more. Like, is it even possible to have these online spaces while also making sure vulnerable people are protected?
That's the big question, isn't it? And honestly, I don't think there's an easy answer. Because on one hand, you've got this amazing tool for connecting with people, building communities. But then on the other hand, it's almost like the internet magnifies things.
Right, the good and the bad.
Exactly. So finding that balance, between letting people express themselves freely, but also preventing harm, it's incredibly difficult.
It really is. And how do you even begin to regulate something as massive and constantly changing as the internet? Like, where do you even start drawing those lines?
It's one of the biggest challenges we face in the digital age, but I think it starts with acknowledging that this isn't just a technology issue, it's a human issue. And that means we need to approach it from different angles. Tech companies, they definitely need to step up, develop better tools for content moderation, make it easier for users to report harmful stuff. But it also comes down to education,
Yeah.
making people aware of the dangers and fostering this sense of, I guess you'd call it digital citizenship.
Digital citizenship. I like that.
Yeah.
Because it's not about, censoring people or shutting down conversations. It's about creating a culture online where everyone feels a sense of responsibility, just like we try to do offline.
Exactly. It's about giving people the tools to think critically, to spot those red flags, to know how and when to report something bad. And it's about encouraging empathy, understanding that even when you come across something disturbing or something you don't agree with, there's probably a real person behind it.
And, it's strange to think about, but Yukemaker, as awful as it was, maybe it can be a wake-up call.
In a way, yeah.
It forces us to acknowledge that those dark corners are out there, and we can't just pretend they don't exist.
Mhm.
But it's not about being afraid. It's about being proactive,
I agree.
taking action.
Absolutely. It's easy to think about these cases as isolated things, but they're not. They reflect something much bigger, something we all need to be part of addressing.
It's true. And it can feel overwhelming. But like we've been saying, knowledge is power. The more we know about these issues, the better prepared we'll be to deal with the challenges of, just existing online. And hopefully we can use that knowledge to create a safer, more ethical internet for everyone.
I couldn't agree more.
Well, I think that about wraps up our deep dive into the unsettling world of Yukemaker.com. It's a case that definitely leaves us with more questions than answers. But hopefully, by having these conversations, by bringing these issues to light, we can start to find those answers together.
I wholeheartedly agree.
To everyone listening, thank you for joining us on this deep dive. Keep those questions coming, keep the conversation going, and remember, awareness is the first step toward creating a safer and hopefully more informed online experience.